Breeders have a huge responsibility and influence over the species that they work with. In this video, we're going to talk about some of those responsibilities that we have and how to make sure that these guys thrive for years to come. So as breeders, we naturally want to make the most attractive and most beautiful animals possible, but sometimes you could get sidetracked and start to focus just on color or just on a particular trait that you're looking for in that pattern morph or in that project, and you will kind of like by-step everything else. I'm here to remind you, you shouldn't do that, and here is a clear example why. In my hands, I have two adult male gargoyle geckos. As you can see, my boy Dracula here is huge. You know, he is what a gargoyle gecko should look like. This is the appropriate size for a gargoyle gecko. He might run a little bit bigger, but for the most part, this is what they should look like naturally. And on my right hand, I have this gargoyle gecko that I have purchased as a juvenile that is now about 4.5 years old, and he is still about like 35 to maybe 40 grams on a good day. An animal like this, although it has some pretty red stripes, I invested a lot of money in, and I may not want to lose out on that money. I think it's my responsibility to not breed an animal like this, because in the long run, when you add this into the gene pool, you're just going to be creating smaller and smaller animals. Aside from some of the other imperfections that this animal might have, which it's still a completely healthy animal. It will make an excellent pet. It's just not something that I want to add to my gene pool, to my breeding stock, right? You want robust, strong, big, healthy animals, and this animal is healthy, but it's just the size comparison is just, you know, astronomical. Just because it has these red stripes, let's say this is the only red stripe male you have, you wouldn't want to breed it just because of the color. You want to take in consideration everything else that comes with that animal. The main reason why gargoyle geckos are named gargoyle geckos is because of the bumps on their head. My boy Dracula here, his bumps are not the best, if I'm being honest. He has decent bumps, but this one here has basically non-existent bumps on his head. That's another reason why everything that's wrong with this gecko is basically not gonna overwrite the nice color he has. So this is an animal that I wouldn't breed, and sometimes that's a hard decision to make because we invest a lot of money in these animals and sometimes they don't turn out like we hoped they did. As a breeder, you have to take the loss, try to keep honest with your art, and try to breed the best animals possible. And that doesn't just go for color and pattern. That goes for structure and functionality. Now this next point is a hard pill to swallow. We know that we have worked so hard to produce some of the nicest looking animals in the world, some of the nicest white covered animals, some of the nicest reds, etc., etc. But sometimes at the very top, the blood starts to get very closely related. If you actually trace back your lineage on a lot of these animals, you're basically line breeding them, because a lot of these animals have a common ancestor and they all come from very, very high-end ancestors, basically, that everybody got offspring from and everybody bred. When you look at big groups of geckos that all look the same, if you trace back their lineage, they're all going to have a common great-grandparent or in one way or another. One of my favorite examples is like Lellerap. Lellerap is a very famous gecko from the Gilpins at LAC Herbs, and that gecko is basically like in every high-end pinstripes lineage that you could find. My point that I'm trying to make is that you don't have to be afraid of breeding backwards sometimes. You may have an animal that doesn't quite fit that project, but it's completely unrelated, and you still may want to breed that into the project just so you get a little bit of diversity in the bloodline. I have Steve-O here. The parents of this animal are basically F1s, and F1 means first generation from wild-caught animals. So this is completely unrelated blood to anything else in the United States. This is an animal I imported from Europe from my friend Farah. This is just such a robust and muscular crested gecko. Obviously the color, the pattern, and even the structure is not there to our standards of today, but you could tell like the size of the head, it's very blocky. The limbs, like the back legs here, are just very muscular. The tail base is thick. This is a very healthy, robust animal. Even though that this gecko might not fit my other projects, you know, good or great, I'm still gonna find a way to breed some of this blood into some of my different lines just to make those lines stronger. I have noticed that some particular lines, when it comes to like high white animals or something, will start to develop little kinks or shorter snouts, or you know, whatever the case may be. The way to kind of like go away from that is by adding some new blood in there. Now, if you breed this to your highest white animal, you know, you're not going to get the results you might want, but you're going to get some animals that you may be able to use later down the line to kind of like diversify and strengthen the bloodline. That's something that's really important, I think. Not being afraid to take a step backwards to go forward is huge, because in this world of everybody wants the best of the best of the best and everybody's focused on just color and pattern, we're starting to forget the functionality of the animals, and I think that's really important. Don't be afraid to take a step backwards. It will go a long way and it will make a difference in the animals you breed in the future. Now, my third point today, I feel like shouldn't have to be said. Oftentimes we all need a reminder that we are working with live animals, and even though this is a business, even though, you know, we want our businesses to grow and to do well and make money, we want to cut costs as much as possible. We have to keep in mind that certain things are just non-negotiable, and we have to try to give these animals their best life possible, especially because they are giving us making us a living, or at least adding some additional income into our life. So we want to make sure that we don't just do the bare minimum. And I know this might be redundant. I know a lot of people may already know this, and it's obvious. I have been around for quite some time, and I have seen a change in, for the most part, for the better, where most breeders want to do things more ethically. They want to give the animal more space. They want to make sure the animals are taken care of better. Back when I started, it was pretty common to just feed these guys crested gecko diet, not give them insects, because quite frankly, it was just like inconvenient. As you grow in this community and as you understand these animals more, you know that these guys 100% need their bugs. We shouldn't do things because it's more convenient to us, but we should do them because it's what they actually need to thrive. And in the long run, it's just gonna give you better productivity, and it's gonna give your animals a better life overall. One thing to keep in mind, especially for a lot of new breeders, you know, that are starting to rack up a bunch of animals, they start to think, okay, how can I maximize the space I have? Sometimes you have to cut back on the amount of space that you give the animals to maximize the amount of animals you could keep in a space. I would kind of gear you to go away from that kind of mindset. And I know it's funny for me to say that because I have a room full of geckos, a house full of geckos. You know, when I started, originally my main idea, my main plan was to produce like as many crested geckos as I could possibly produce. Now, moving forward, I'm starting to realize that, you know, there are so many reptile breeders out there. There's so many gecko breeders out there in particular. There's no like shortage of lower end or even just like regular crested geckos. She's all right, everybody. My point being that if you focus on higher quality, you're going to be able to give your animals a better life, because you're going to be able to keep fewer animals. You could focus more on those animals, and you're going to be able to get more money for those animals. You're not going to be able to compete with the big breeders that produce 20,000 geckos a year. They're out there. That's a real number. They're going to be wholesaling these geckos now for, you know, 15, 25, 30 bucks. And that's not something you want to compete with, because at the end of the day, you're going to get worn out and you're not going to be able to keep up with that. Keep in mind that it's a hobby, but it's also a business. It's not like any other business. This is something that we love, and we started because we love these animals. So don't cut corners when it comes to their care. Make sure that they all have water bowls. Make sure that they all have a good amount of insects a week, especially your breeder females and juveniles, because it'll make the world of a difference. All right, guys, and lastly, we got to stop ragging on new breeders and gatekeeping. I see so many new breeders that are afraid to talk or ask questions, because every time they do on a Facebook post or on Instagram, they just get shut down, and people call them dumb, and how could you do this? How could you think this, that, or the other? You got to remember, at one point you were a beginner as well, and as much if you hate that kind of culture of people doing things wrong, then you got to try and educate those people. Some people are going to learn a lot from just videos like this, but a lot of people learn mostly from communication. A lot of our customers are future breeders, and if you don't have the patience to talk to your customers and talk to these new up and coming breeders, then you maybe not be qualified to do this, because this is not just about breeding geckos in the long run. This is about, you know, the community and getting everybody started and making sure that we just improve and better the whole aspect, every single aspect of breeding. Don't be quick to shut somebody down if they do things differently than you. Make sure that you are open to whatever they suggest. You can have your doubt and your skepticism, but be respectful even when somebody does something you don't like. In my opinion, I see a lot of people that do things that I wouldn't do personally or that I don't like, but that's no reason to attack their business or to attack them as an individual. I think if you have an issue with somebody, it's best to talk to them one-on-one and resolve that issue, instead of going to your friends and saying how this person's so dumb because they do this, that, or the other. With that being said, those are some of the reminders that I want to give out to you guys that breed geckos, to all of us. Sometimes I need to be reminded of this myself. If you enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments below, and thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys on the next one.